Everyone, good evening, everyone. It's just wonderful to see so many people and many familiar faces joining us this evening for our conversation with our four former female Peace Corps directors, Elaine Chao, Carol Bellamy, Carrie Hessler-Radelet, and Jody Olsen. Our event tonight not only honors Peace Corps Week, but also Women's History Month and International Women's Day. My name is Kathleen Corey. I'm an RPCV from Liberia and former country director to both Sri Lanka and North Macedonia, and currently am the president of Women of Peace Corps Legacy. I'm proud to say that both Jody and Carrie were very involved in the founding of Women of Peace Corps Legacy. And so I invite you all to check us out on our website or Facebook page, and we're also on Instagram. So these four women have had highly successful careers, both before and after their time as Peace Corps directors. And I just want to say to all four of them, thank you so much for giving your time to us this evening so that we can have a conversation that's meaningful about Peace Corps. So in addition to hearing about their time as directors, we'll also look forward to getting any suggestions or guidance that they would pass on to other up-and-coming aspiring women leaders. And then at the end of our session tonight, we'll take questions from you, from the audience, and our panelists will answer those. So I will say I am pleased to have had the honor of working with these outstanding leaders. I've worked with Elaine and Carol and Carrie at Peace Corps, and I worked with Jody very closely as we were launching Women of Peace Corps Legacy. All right, so we've had 6 female Peace Corps directors, our 4 that are part of our session tonight, and 2 others who, I'm sorry to say, are no longer with us. Carolyn Payton, who served from 1977 to 1975, was our first female and Black Peace Corps director. And she's well known for expanding the number of minority and women directors. And then the other woman that was our leader was Loretta Rupi, who served from 1981 to 1989 and was our longest serving Peace Corps director. And she initiated the very successful Women in Development program. Before we go on further and we begin the interview, I just wanted to bring to your attention the Q&A feature of this webinar. So please put any questions that you have into the chat. If your question is selected during our Q&A period at the end of our session here, we'll call on you to unmute and ask your question personally. And should you not wish to ask it personally, then please write on your question anonymous, and Katie McSheffrey, our vice president, will read it to the group. Okay. All right, so at this point, it is my pleasure to begin interviewing our first of our female leaders, and that is Jody Olson. We're going to begin with Jody. Jody, as I mentioned, was our former president of Women of Peace Corps Legacy and served as Peace Corps director from March 2018 to January 2021. And she was a Peace Corps volunteer in Tunisia from 1966 to 1968. And she also served as chief of staff under Paul Coverdale and deputy director under Gadi Vasquez. Jody, as we all know, has led the agency through an unprecedented time in Peace Corps history, unprecedented, evacuating all volunteers globally due to COVID. So Jody, I'm going to ask you a question now. It's kind of a 2-part question that I will be asking to all of our directors, former directors, and that is this. Tell us about an achievement that you are the most proud of, and then also maybe one of the difficult challenges that you encountered as Peace Corps director and how you addressed it. So Jody, the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the chance to be here tonight. And I want to do an extra shout out as I begin to any of the ERPCVs that are joining us tonight, because I'm going to focus, because both what I feel was a success and a challenge was really this last year. And for that to have worked so well is in part dependent on every single Peace Corps volunteer that we had to bring back. And I want to begin by stating for this last year, bringing back almost 7,000 volunteers in 8 days, with everybody staying safe and healthy. It is in part because of each of you, ERPCVs, that understood, was gracious, was wonderful volunteers, and understood and responded so well that whatever success we had is big part because of every one of the volunteers we had to bring home. I wanted to start with just a little sidebar, then I'll come back to that. But when I think about a moment of real satisfaction during my time as director, it was signing the memorandum of implementation for Peace Corps to go to Vietnam. I had been part of the early conversations about us going to Vietnam 17 years ago. And over the years, this year, maybe not, where's the trust? How can the trust be there? Et cetera, through the years. And it never was quite right. It never quite got to that point. And the fact that we signed this agreement and that we already have an office in Hanoi now, and they want those volunteers as quickly as they can, to me was part of the tribute of what is trust, what is building friendship over the years. And just quickly, a quick story, when I was at a high school outside of Hanoi, and just to see, because this is one of the potential sites for Peace Corps volunteers, and the headmaster said, oh, we have great space in the school for your volunteers to stay. And I said, nope. We live with the community and we live with host families. And I talked a little bit about what that was about, at which point the 4 teachers, English teachers that were standing there went, I want to be a host mother. Host mother for me, host mother for me. The spontaneous already coming together. And you think of Vietnam and you think of the histories. And I think of that moment that it was, we're ready. We're ready to go. We love you, you love us, we're ready to go. So that's one outside of all my other adventures during these past 3 years. But let me talk briefly about COVID and the need to evacuate all the Peace Corps volunteers, because I think it helps set a stage for the rest of the conversations this evening, because we're in a very unusual place. As I think, as almost everyone knows, starting last January, when it was becoming very well known in China what was happening, and we had to begin with that process in evacuating China, and then we had to evacuate Mongolia. And then we were watching and hearing and seeing and feeling country by country, oh my heavens, we're going to have to close the borders in 2 days. We're going to be closing the borders in 3 days. The international flights are starting to close down. And so from a US perspective, we weren't fully aware of what was happening country by country as things moved forward day by day. And so we left Mongolia in February, late February, but suddenly what had been a gentle wave was becoming a big wave and was becoming a tsunami. And that growing recognition, country by country, that we would not be able to keep volunteers safe led to the decision on March 15th at 2:00 in the afternoon, I'll never forget it, the most difficult decision I made in my life, to evacuate all Peace Corps volunteers around the world. For some, and in some countries, absolute surprise. Why? We want to stay, we can say, we can weather this. For other countries, it was already hours away from us not being able to get out. But we recognized that we needed to get out immediately. And you don't know when you make a decision like that. Here I have been part of Peace Corps for 55 years. It's my life. It's how I define myself. As for almost everyone who's part of this evening, it defines us in so many ways. And I think of the previous Peace Corps directors, 3 of whom were with us tonight. Am I letting everybody down? Am I letting Sarge Shriver down? Am I letting President Kennedy down? Am I letting down all the previous directors? Am I letting down the volunteers, the countries? It was scary because you don't know when you make a decision like that, what the outcome's going to be. You have no idea, but we had to do it. I want to say that the thousands who emerged from taxi drivers, from people who would escort volunteers from village to village to get them to the capital city. Everyone was there to help make this happen and help make this happen quickly. And we tried to bring closure, even when we had 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours to bring closure to volunteers as they were getting on the airplane. People were beginning to see what was happening in the US and some of the fears coming forward about coming back to the US. Aren't we safer in our country? Well, we all know what this process has been, but bringing all the volunteers back, asking them all to quarantine, trying to give them the support that we could, working from an agency that was not designed to bring back 7,000 volunteers at one point. I promise we did not break any laws, but boy, did we come close on a few occasions to be able to get some extra health insurance, to be able to get some unemployment insurance, to be able to get non-competitive eligibility. So we worked very hard and to be there. And as part of that, for those first 2 months after the volunteers came back, on the US side, again, thank you to all of you who are here tonight. You were among the thousands that reached out to the ERPCVs, gave places to stay, gave encouragement, helped with jobs, helped with building new communities. You were fabulous because you returned Peace Corps volunteers. During this time, staying in daily touch with the Hill, our colleagues on the Hill, our colleagues with the administration, particularly OMB, we were able to continue to get support. They became our advocates. And so they were able to hold our resources strong. Give us what we need. Do you need more money? Are you okay? Tell us if you need anything more. With that, it meant that we were able to protect everybody's job. Everyone in the US, everybody in Washington, most importantly, our staff overseas, our host country staff in particular overseas. Because the phasing as we continue to go forward in trying to prepare a return to service is dependent on every post, all those host country staff who stay in touch, who visit with counterparts, who help design, redesign, and build for our return. And we focused on it day by day by day. Now we kept thinking that we could go back. And I know December 20th, I was really wanting us to go back, but again, I had to make a decision that we had to pull the plug again. New variants of COVID was arising and we could not get the international flights that we needed. But I want to bring this together with a couple of points. The reason why we were able to do it was because we prepared. We prepared for 60 years. We prepared because of our mission and our 3 goals. We prepared because of friendships, personal relationships, host families, students, colleagues that knew and believed in us, and we knew and believed in our colleagues in every single country. So when something had to happen, instantaneously, everyone was there. And I want to take it through these last few months up until January, which is when I left, is every country has said, we want to return. We want you to return. They're watching, and they have been watching what's happening in the US. We have been watching what they've been trying to do country by country by country. That's all up here somewhere. What has been happening because of 60 years of preparation? We know you're going to come back. It might be a year, it might be 6 months, it might be 9 months. We know you're coming back. And we know that you're going to continue with the relationships that you've had. Some of the work might be different, but we know that we can sustain that trust. So I think, when I think about the greatest challenge and March 15th, which is coming up pretty quickly, is really a day I can never forget, because I worried that I was going to let everybody down. But the great joy as we have completed this journey this last year is the faith, the trust, the humility. Thousands have shown thousands across our countries, with ministries, with counterparts, with families, with volunteers. And that tells me that we can go back strong, very strong, because it's the underlying relationships. It's those three goals that keep us strong. And that was my great joy when I finished my term in January, was such a belief in our future.
Jody, my goodness. Jody, thank you so much. I think we would say everyone owes you a debt of gratitude for, well, really, Jody, for taking on probably the toughest task that Peace Corps has dealt with, maybe in its history, I would guess certainly in its history, and the complicating factors to bringing people home and still keeping our staff and our counterparts and our mission alive in all these countries that are now waiting for us to return, had to have been just a monumental task. And you and your team were able to pull it together. And so I'm really pleased to start with you tonight, because it's an inspirational note that we will all remember, and we'll see if there's some questions in the chat. But thanks for your leadership on this, Jody, in the really, really tough time. And it's still a challenging time, as we all know, as Peace Corps mounts the really, again, monumental task of trying to get volunteers back into the field. But it feels like things are been created. And the only one thing that I will just mention, which is kind of interesting, when I was the Asia Pacific Regional Director in 1993, I put Vietnam as a potential country to go into. So from 1993 until now, we've been thinking about, wouldn't that be cool? So it was wonderful. It actually really finally happened. Anyway, thank you, Jody, so much. Okay, bless you. All righty, so now we're going to move on to Carrie. Carrie, you're up next.
Great.
So Carrie served as a Peace Corps Director from June 2014 to 2017. Carrie was a Peace Corps volunteer in Western Samoa from 1981 to 83. She followed the tenure of Aaron Williams and has served in a number of senior positions. I think, Carrie, I think you said once 7+ years, including being deputy director for 2 years prior to being named the actual Peace Corps director. And Carrie inherited the agency at a time when there was substantial volunteer safety and sexual assault issues that were facing the agency in quite, what do I say, deep, important way that needed attention. So Carrie, I'm going to ask you the same thing that I asked Jody, which is, tell us about what you see as your greatest achievement during that time, and then what were some of the challenges or the most difficult challenge that you had, and how did you address it?
Thank you so much, Corey. And it's just wonderful to be with all of you, especially with my fellow women directors. Great to have time with you again today. It's just wonderful. I'm going to start with my own personal story. Actually, Corey, I was thinking about highlighting something other than sexual assault risk reduction response because I do talk about that fairly often. But I think for this particular group, I will in fact focus on that. But I want to start with my own personal story as a volunteer. I was a volunteer in Samoa, as you heard. I served there with my husband. I was actually the first 3-generation Peace Corps volunteer when I swore in. My aunt had been a volunteer in the mid-60s. My grandparents had served in retirement in the early 70s. And then my husband and I we were sworn in 1981 in Samoa. And I was a teacher. I taught at a Catholic school, Paul VI College, had a wonderful host family, and just really loved my Peace Corps experience. And I was sexually assaulted by my APCD, by my Associate Peace Corps Director, who was my direct supervisor, 3 times over a period of 18 months. And each assault took place in the Peace Corps office. This individual stalked me when I was unaccompanied by my husband in the office. I would go into the office once a month, like many volunteers, to get the mail or to complete a training or go for a physical and what have you. We had an office that had lots of small rooms in it, and he stalked me. He preyed on me during the few moments when I was either alone in the photocopy room or in the library, or after hours when there were few people in the office. In every situation, he pushed me down, pinned me to the floor, tore my clothes, and attempted to rape me. And I was able to fight each time. And I escaped, bruised and killed each time. After it happened, I felt completely numb, especially the first time. I was embarrassed. I was enraged. I felt completely humiliated. And like so many other survivors, I blamed myself. I feared that no one would believe me if I came forward. And I was scared that Steve and I would be forced to leave Samoa and the work that we loved so much if I came forward. I didn't want my assailant to steal my Peace Corps experience. I had wanted to be a Peace Corps volunteer all my life, and I desperately wanted to be seen as a good volunteer. And that did not include being a victim. In addition, Peace Corps, like most workplaces in the 1980s, had absolutely no provision for reporting or addressing rape or sexual assault, so there actually seemed no point in disclosing what had happened to me. The only person I told was Steve, my husband, whom I swore to silence, and I have to say that his pain and rage and sense of hopelessness was equal or maybe even greater than mine because he could do nothing about it. Finally, after my assailant stalked and assaulted me for the 3rd time, I went directly to the highest ranking female Peace Corps staff member, another APCD, and submitted a formal report to the agency. While that person was very sympathetic and kind, she was really a wonderful person, I didn't hear anything from Peace Corps. There was silence. I heard nothing more from anyone. I completed my service and left Samoa a couple months later. I later learned when I came to be deputy director that my assailant continued to work at Peace Corps in Samoa for another 15 years. I think it's important to say here that despite the pain and terror that I experienced at the hands of my attacker, Steve and I had an extraordinary Peace Corps experience. It brought us so much joy. It changed our life. It shaped my career and my husband's career, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything in all the world. But it definitely was part of my experience. Fast forward 28 years, I was confirmed as the deputy director in 2010, and 2 months later, I received a call from Brian Ross. Actually, it was 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after I was sworn in, received a phone call from Brian Ross, host of the television program 2020. And the show was going to do an expose of the Peace Corps and its lack of support for some volunteers. And I reluctantly agreed to represent Peace Corps on the show, even though I was completely brand new and woefully, really woefully unprepared. I think the reason why I decided to do it is because my professional background was in public health and in particular sexual and reproductive health. And I just felt that I was probably going to be better able to address some of the concerns and the questions because I was a woman and because I had some comfort level in discussing these issues. On 2020, I was confronted by the real, very painful and deeply, deeply personal accounts of 6 returned volunteers who had been sexually assaulted during their service. And I have to say, even more painful than that was the story of the Pusey family who had lost their incredibly beautiful, courageous, extraordinary daughter, Kate, a whistleblower who had been tragically murdered in Banana after reporting the sexual misconduct of a part-time Peace Corps staff person. Both groups shared their deep concern, their grief, their disappointment with the way the Peace Corps handled their situation over the years. As difficult as it was to be on that program, and it was incredibly difficult to be in the spotlight on this particular issue, I was so very grateful to the Pusey family and the survivors for having the courage to come forward publicly with their story, because their accounts pointed both to the love they felt for Peace Corps and their desire for real change. They were the catalysts. In their stories, it was clear to me that we had failed them. In failing them, we had contributed to their pain and made their recovery so much more difficult. Their stories were clear evidence of the need for change. As a survivor, hearing their stories forced me to confront my own sexual assault, because for nearly 30 years, I had buried my own painful story deep within myself and had told nobody apart from my husband, Steve, and we had not spoken about it for 25 years. But I knew that if I was to lead the agency in its time of crisis, and Director Williams put me in charge of this initiative, this issue, this crisis response, I knew I was going to have to own my past and go public about what had happened to me while serving as a volunteer so many years ago. I would have to tell my children, my parents, my siblings, my fellow volunteers, my friends, the entire Peace Corps community about my sexual assault. And it was something that I had not even addressed myself. I knew that I was going to have to address the guilt and shame, honestly, that I felt for failing to speak out loudly when it had happened to me. You know, 2020 prompted me to investigate what had happened to my attacker, and that was when I had learned that he had continued to serve throughout his employment, and that rumors of his predatory behavior had continued throughout that time. And I couldn't help thinking that if I had raised my voice at that time, would other survivors have come forward? There were rumors even then when I was there. Would Peace Corps have listened in 1982 if other voices had joined mine? If I had spoken out loudly, would my assailant have stopped his attacks on other volunteers? And then I wondered, if 2020 hadn't happened, would Peace Corps have made the reforms as quickly as it and as intently as it had? I'd like to believe we would have, but I really honestly can't be sure. As painful as it was, 2020 was the beginning of my own journey to healing and acceptance. And it was also the beginning of a long journey to create Peace Corps Sexual Assault Risk Reduction and Response Program. Peace Corps has come such a long way since that time. And I'm really proud to say that it's now considered a leader in the area of sexual assault risk reduction and response, especially among the federal government. It has shared its experience, its tools, its training with other government agencies, with universities, with partner nations, with NGOs. The agency has made more than 30 policy changes. It has trained every single volunteer and staff person, created an office of victim advocacy. We developed specialized training in trauma-informed care for first responders, created a whole reporting structure, supported an anonymous hotline hosted by RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. It created a sexual assault advisory council of our nation's leading experts to guide the agency in its quest to continue to improve our support for volunteers. But I think most importantly, the most important part of all really is that the Peace Corps does not shy away from the truth of volunteers' painful stories. Rather, these stories have become the catalyst for really the most extensive reform effort the agency has ever undertaken. So this reform, the reform to our sexual assault risk reduction and response program became a reform dedicated to placing volunteer care and support at the forefront of everything it does. So this whole incident with sexual assault risk reduction response became the catalyst for a huge reform effort that continues to this day, I believe, but certainly marked the 7.5 years that I was at Peace Corps. It has taken a long time to get to this point, and Peace Corps, I think I can say with confidence, although I haven't been there for 4 years, but I know Jody, and now I know Carol Spahn, who's the acting director. I know that they are absolutely committed to learning and growing their support for volunteers every single day. And this is a long-term effort, and it will never be completed because there's always more we can do, but its commitment is really unwavering. I do want to say that sexual assaults of Peace Corps volunteers by Peace Corps staff members are really, really rare. But when it happens, it's totally devastating. I mean, I think I'm living testimony to that. Like the Me Too movement, Peace Corps' journey towards reconciliation began when a small handful of volunteers and concerned families came forward to tell their stories, to openly, honestly tell their painful stories, and to bring healing to their own lives, but also to say that this must stop and to hold our agency accountable. And so, as I think I'm going to end here, but what I want to leave you with is this final word on the importance of speaking truth, of naming truth, and of hearing truth and listening to truth and honoring the dignity of all people, especially when things are hard, especially when you're confronting difficult issues like sexual assault or diversity, equity, and inclusion, or medical care that didn't go the way it was planned. It is so, so important that we honor those voices and listen to them, because that is the space where change begins.
Carrie, I was in the field when this came out. I was the country director to North Macedonia when much of this was evolving and unfolding. I have never been happier in my life to see all of the structure, all of the systems, all of the support, all of the love and caring that went into taking care of volunteers who had gone through these traumatic experiences. And I think one of the biggest things that I observed is there was an acceptance, a support for volunteers had a place to come and talk about what had happened to them. Different from you, who buried it for 35 years, which we all know then can have some, rather severe consequences when it's buried for so long, but encouraging people who had had whatever experience they had to come forward and deal with it at the time, because there was a support system there. Because we said, we've got Sarles, we have staff who are going to talk to you.
Right.
We have Washington who's going to support you. It is fine to come to us. And it gave permission. It just gave permission. And I found myself talking to young women in ways that I didn't when I was director in Sri Lanka in the 90s, because it hadn't been brought to the forefront.
No,
So
it's true. And we even changed policies so that the Office of Victim Advocacy and some of our medical care providers could provide support to volunteers who served 30 years ago. I mean, there's no final date for, once you're sexually assaulted, it's a lifelong journey. It really is.
Yeah.
But I really felt that for myself personally, because it was a part of what my own personal experience was as a volunteer, it actually gave me more credibility to be able to work with volunteers and staff would experience the same thing and to lead the change. So
I think, Carrie, the other example for me is that if a Peace Corps director cares deeply about seeing systems in the agency rectified that are not as good as they could be, it can be done. If you have the will, if you have the passion and you have the will to make it happen, it can happen, because that's how you remembered.
That's exactly right. And you know what? There's always more we can do. Always.
We have to listen to them and then figure out what can be done. Yeah. Carrie, thank you. And I guess I want to say on behalf of all the volunteers and staff who have dealt with this issue over the years, we were really pleased to see that there were things that could be done that were positive to support the volunteers. So thank you. Carol, you're up next. Turning to Carol Bellamy. Carol left an impressive career in New York State including she was the first woman to be elected president of the New York City Council. And she left the New York State positions to become Peace Corps director from October 1993 to May 95. Carol was our very first RPCV to lead the agency, having served as a volunteer in Guatemala from 1963 to 1965. And I remember well, because I worked under Carol at headquarters, and how the volunteer community was delighted that we were having somebody who understood what it was like to be a Peace Corps volunteer, to lead the agency, this place that we felt so passionate about and knew that she did too. So Carol, I'm going to ask you the same questions that I did for Jody and I did for Carrie, but what achievement are you the most proud of in those couple of years you were there? And how about a difficult challenge, and how did you deal with it?
I'm going to get to that, well, highlight. I don't know whether it's achievement, but highlight in a moment. But I just wanted to say, as you just pointed out, I suppose a personal highlight was that I was the first returned Peace Corps volunteer to be director. But I want to particularly say, having, and I hope everybody has been listening closely, that one of the great things about Peace Corps is whether it's a returned Peace Corps volunteer as director or someone who had not had any relationship to the Peace Corps before that, Peace Corps has been lucky to have really excellent Peace Corps directors. It is a political appointee, but whatever administration has been in power, the Peace Corps has been lucky to have first-rate directors. And if you even had the slightest thought about that, just think about the two women you've just heard from. So just an example, just a small example of the quality of the directors over the years. So that I wanted to make that point. And you'll hear from Elaine again, terrific. I wanted to touch on, or highlight, I suppose, was the fact that Peace Corps has always been able to be relevant to the times it is in. And so we're celebrating 60 years. I was there, as you mentioned, in the 90s. What was happening in the early 90s? Well, the Berlin Wall fell, and here was Peace Corps going into Eastern Europe. It didn't start while I was director, but we really had to really take on the bulk of that work of moving into Eastern Europe and all the challenges that it provided. This is both the highlight and the challenge in some ways. Peace Corps had always been in southern developing countries, if you will. As I've said before, people were used to development being where you were in a warm climate. All of a sudden now we were dealing with cold climates. We were dealing with some of the health challenges of volunteers in dealing with freezing weather, in expectations of volunteers who were coming. Where is my hut I'm supposed to live in? And they're living in falling down Soviet Union housing, Russian housing. So, but it was, again, Peace Corps relevant to the times, able to move into the various Eastern European countries, and also making the decision, because remember, we've always been about not just staying forever, it's helping people to help themselves. And when it was no longer particularly necessary or needed, we moved into Poland, and then we came out of Poland. We moved into Hungary, and we came out of Hungary. On the other hand, we're still in a number of the Eastern European and former Soviet Union countries. So it was a very interesting time because times were changing. Similarly, with apartheid moving on, hopefully, in South Africa, we finally had an opportunity to negotiate the entry of Peace Corps in South Africa. For me, highlights to say the Peace Corps is solid, Peace Corps is steady, but it's always relevant to the times in which it exists. And the volunteers are relevant to the times in which they exist. So whether it was Eastern Europe or Central Asia or South Africa, Peace Corps was ready. We moved, the volunteers went in, they were able to do actually some terrific work. So that's a highlight I wanted to mention. I'm going to talk about a quirky challenge that I had because I laugh about it sometimes, but I had a fight as the Peace Corps director with the head of the CIA. And here's what the issue was. And again, it goes, Carrie, Park, to your principle, and we must be true to ourselves. The CIA, well, the director would call me. He wouldn't call me. He would have his secretary call me on the office phone to tell me that he was going to call me on the protected phone. I should tell you, I never could remember the telephone number of the protected phone. I always had it on a stickum under the protected phone. I don't think that was high security, but that was the best I could do. It seemed that was real Peace Corps. And the issue was the following. Peace Corps has rules and regulations. We've had them there for years to assure the Peace Corps is independent. The Peace Corps it cannot be compromised. And one of the areas of rules and regulations is that while someone who served in the Peace Corps, when they finish their Peace Corps service, they can in the future serve in a position dealing with international intelligence or security. But one, they are not allowed to do it for at least 2 years after they close their close of service. And two, they are not ever allowed to serve in a position of intelligence or security in the country in which they serve. Well, this CIA director wanted me to to basically go to Congress and say, well, we don't really think that's that important. And it's okay that the CIA wants this person who was a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea and now is presumably in the CIA. I don't know which intelligence service it was. I'm sure it was a fine intelligence service to serve in that country. And I received calls from more members of Congress. I received calls from every pressure point. I don't think they knew I was from New York, so it didn't make much of a difference. But I received a lot of calls from different pressure points to say, you have to tell Congress it's okay. That's a silly little law. Who cares about that? I mean, they haven't been there for a while. Let them go in. I said no. I said no. I said no, and I said no. So that was just an interesting sideline challenge, but you never know what's going to happen when you're in the Peace Corps.
Carol, thank you. Thank you. I'm sure all of you have all these quirky little stories of things that you had to deal with when you were the Peace Corps director. So Carol, I do want to underscore again, I was working for you back at headquarters. We were just so happy to have a returned Peace Corps volunteer be our leader. There was an acknowledgement that you had a deep understanding of what were the issues, what people were going through, what we needed to care about, what we had to focus on. It was just really appreciated.
And that we had good days and bad days.
We did have some of those. I remember.
I want to mention one other small but interesting thing. Think about the 90s. It was the mid 90s. During the time I was there, we had the first time we ever had a Peace Corps web page.
Oh, right.
Oh,
my God. Yeah, right. I remember, a little side note, but I remember going out to Hungary to do the programming for Hungary, and our computer literally was 3 feet tall. Really, I mean this, 3 feet tall computer that was in a case that we drug on the airplane, and we carried $9,999 on our person because there were no banks, and we put them in a safe carrying a 3-foot computer. And this was 1991. I mean, not that long ago.
That's what the country directors had to do. They had to paste cash to their bodies to get it into these countries because there wasn't a financial system. And I remember actually country directors also saying that one of the worst parts about being a country director in the early days of the Berlin Wall falling was having to drink the worst vodka that ever existed in life.
Worst vodka at 9 a.m. usually was my experience.
So as I say, Peace Corps has stayed relevant in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and onward.
All right, Carol, great fun to see you, really great fun. And now it is my honor to introduce and talk about Elaine Chao. Elaine was our first and to the state only Asian American to be Peace Corps director. And Elaine served from October 1991 to November 1992. President Bush personally tapped her to head the agency at a very important time of, well, extreme change in the world as the former Soviet Union collapsed and our foreign policy took a brand new direction. And President Bush knew that Elaine Chao was the right person to help us get into some of the more difficult parts of Eastern Europe. And that was what she was brought on to do and did a great job of it. So Elaine, same question as we've done with the others. Would you mind telling us something that you're the most proud of, and then maybe something that was a difficult challenge for you that you encountered and how you addressed it?
Thank you very much. Appreciate your being the moderator. I want to say, I'm going to throw some bouquets. First of all, to Carol Bellamy. I was so aware that I was not a Peace Corps volunteer. And so I was so happy and so delighted. And I recommended to the new administration, I don't know whether they listened to me or not, probably not, but I said it was really important that the next volunteer be, that the next director be a volunteer. And I'm so glad that Jody, when, you know, in the last administration was named the director as well, because she was just so eminently qualified. And I think she was, Jody, are you the first Republican? Anyway, Peace Corps volunteer who became director as well. So Carol, I was rooting for you. I'm from New York, so I knew you before then. The second thing also, you know, Carrie and I have spoken, we've kept in touch during the time when she was director. And Carrie, I never knew that. I'm so sad. And I feel like crying when I hear your story. And I think you're so brave. And I think you need to, if I may, I think you need to be easy on yourself because, you know, that was like 1982. That was before the Clarence Thomas hearings. You know, I mean, that was 1991. Times were really different. Who would have thought? And there was a sense of guilt. I mean, all of us have experienced that. You know, somehow, you know, we did something wrong. We, you know, enticed it or we attracted it or something. I just really admire your courage in telling the story and your very forceful role when you became deputy director and director in trying to address the problem. And so kudos to you on that. And thank you for your courage and for your willingness to speak out. Really, really admire you for that. And then to Jody, who I love, you know, I was never a volunteer because, you know, I came as an immigrant to this country. I came when I was about 8 years old. We lived in Queens, New York in a 1-bedroom apartment with 3 kids. My father held 3 jobs to make ends meet. And it never, and this is a problem with finding diverse candidates, you know, it just never occurred to me that I would not have a job after college. You know, and especially coming from an Asian American background, believe it or not, I mean, this may sound weird to you, but I gave my salary to my family. Whatever I earned, I gave it to the family. And that was, we split it, we shared it. I helped in the upkeep of the family. And that was kind of, you know, the tradition, the custom. I never thought anything of it. Years later, I thought, well, what the heck am I doing giving my money over to my parents like that? But that was just kind of what was expected. So I think for a lot of people of color, it's really difficult, especially if they come from a difficult background, to be able to volunteer, because I just don't think the stipend is enough. I mean, if you have financial obligations, you've got student loans, you've got sisters and brothers to take care of. And with Asian Americans, you take care of the whole extended family. And if you have money, everybody comes to you. It's not like you just, and if you don't give, it's a real big shame. So that's kind of like the cultural thing. So I didn't know, I knew about Peace Corps, but never been one. I admired it so much. I was so thrilled when I was asked to be the director. And I want to thank Jody Olson because she was my Sherpa. I grew so much in that job. First of all, I was very reserved. I mean, I was very Asian. I was not used to being expressive. I was not used to, being very loud and laughing loudly. I was very, very stoic and very reserved. And then to have to go on to like Peace Corps events where you have to like put, t-shirts on or costumes on or something and participate in skits. I mean, it was really difficult. And I just remember Jody, who's then the chief of staff, just being so kind. You saw her presentation today and how profound it was. Her decision-making process about how she made the decision to evacuate the volunteers. But Jody was so profound. She's so empathetic. She has incredible emotional intelligence, which is why I was so glad that she was finally made a director, in 2018. So I will always be grateful to Jody for introducing me to a part of mainstream America, which I had really never been introduced to before. I mean, I lived in people think I'm establishment, but I really lived in a very ghettoized environment. I was with an Asian American community. We stuck to ourselves. I ate Chinese food. We used chopsticks every night. My father came home and he would, speak. We would all stay silent, even though we loved him dearly, of course. But it was a very ghettoized, for lack of a better word, a very insular environment. So I learned about mainstream America and what it meant to be an American through the kindness and the friendship of Jody, which is why I'm so grateful. Okay, now speaking more about Jody. So Jody agonized about when to pull the volunteers. I didn't realize she was going through that because I had problems of my own. As Secretary of Transportation, the President Trump, declared the national emergency on March 13th, which is a Friday. Prior to that time, the world was beginning to understand a little bit already that something was going on. And countries were acting on their own and making their own rules about who can leave, who must stay, who can go to the airports. And if Jody had not acted at the precise time that she did, the volunteers would have been stuck in country for a minimum of at least 3 months, if not 6 to 8 months. Because we dealt at the Transportation Department with that. We had to deal with Americans who wanted desperately to come back, but they didn't take it seriously, or they didn't hear the news, or they didn't realize how serious the situation was. But we worked with the State Department to charter flights from commercial airlines. And there were countries that would not allow American airplanes to land. So even though we got the charter flights from American Airlines or United Airlines, they could not land. Argentina was a real problem. A lot of South American countries were a problem. I had a classmate, a schoolmate in Morocco. She had gone with a group of like 28 people, and they had landed like March 15th or something. No, it was around 2 days before, March 12th, March 11th. Not expecting that they would never be able to get home. We had to move them literally. They were in Morocco. They had to move from Marrakesh to Rabat, and we had to move them from city to city in an effort to find an opening through which the country would allow an American plane to land. And then there were no American embassy personnel in country because the State Department's policy was to evacuate the staff right away. So there were very, very few State Department employees in country. And so all the work for coordinating with Americans in foreign countries was done by the Washington, D.C. staff. So they were working 24/7. They were working during their daytime and during their nighttime, working with others, with Americans in other countries. And everything was computerized. So you couldn't, if you were in country, and I know this, we had people who they could not reach anybody, any embassy personnel, except by registering online. And then they wouldn't hear anything. There was nobody to call. I'm not criticizing the State Department. I'm just telling the chaos that was going on. And there were over 250,000 Americans who were overseas. They had dependents, they had spouses, maybe they have significant others who were not American citizens. They were not allowed to come back to the United States. And if they did come back, they had to quarantine for 14 days, not right away, because all this policy was being formed even as we were trying to get people out of country. So I just had my classmate actually at Harvard, her significant other was stuck in Bulgaria for 6 months and he could not get out. So, I think, Jody, if you had any doubt, and I said this yesterday also, you did the right thing and you are to be commended for acting decisively, quickly, and realizing that the number one priority is to protect the safety of the volunteers. Because had you acted even a day or two, countries were shutting down on their own without even telling us because they were afraid, obviously, of infection. So every country was different. They were making their own rules, and it was just so confusing. So kudos to you, Jody, for keeping our volunteers safe and making sure that they were able to come back. And they should be very thankful to you. And then, as Kathleen mentioned, when I was a Peace Corps volunteer and Jody was the chief of staff, I followed Paul Coverdale, and Paul opened up the first Peace Corps programs in Eastern Europe. And then the Soviet Union collapsed and the Baltic nations wanted volunteers. The former republics of the former Soviet Union wanted volunteers, but they wanted a very different kind of volunteers. They kind of prided themselves on being more sophisticated. So they wanted people with more higher skill sets. They wanted, marketing people, business people, accountants, lawyers, because they were trying to set up a new economy and their needs were different than other parts of the world. So I was under a lot of pressure to try to expand Peace Corps programs in all these other parts of the world that were opening up, like the former Soviet Union, the Baltic nations. China was interested as well. And one of the things that was drummed into my head by the Return Peace Corps volunteers was, you better not cut the budget. You better not divert any funds from any of the existing programs. So 40% of the monies were in Africa, and we kept that. So we maintained all the existing programs. And then on top of that, we got additional monies to meet the needs of the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and also the Baltics. I will also say, as the last thing, I know it's not about me, but I have to say I grew so much in my experience with Peace Corps. I learned so much about myself, about people, about how to be a better leader, and how to relate to others. And I'm so impressed with so many of the Peace Corps country country directors. I said this before, Bob Friedman in Niger was terrific. John Dara in Russia, that was a whole new country. He was terrific. And of course, Kate Rafferty. Kate was hilarious. And she had her daughter, Elizabeth, at the time. And these were just such such wonderful years that I learned so much and I grew so much personally and professionally. For that, I will always be thankful to the volunteers, to the staff, and of course to the previous directors who are on this this webcast as well. So Kathleen, that's it. Thank you.
Elaine, thank you very much. Yeah, I know it was no easy task to be going into the former Soviet Union with all of the challenges that were involved with that. I was working on that at headquarters as well, and we did it. You did it. You led everyone, and we did a pretty yeoman's job. Went into a lot of countries really fast, and it was successful. And we're still enjoying the fruits of some of those posts. I'm going to ask, so thank you very much, Elaine. That was wonderful. I'm going to ask Glenn Bloomquist, who is president of the National Peace Corps Association. Glenn, can I get you to please unmute and tell us just a tiny bit about Representative Garamendi's bipartisan Reauthorization Act that you all, NPCA, has been putting an enormous amount of effort into, and that we learned about for the first time last night at another webinar. So Glenn, come in and tell us just a little bit about it.
Well, Corey, thank you so much. First and foremost, I'm just really enjoying this conversation, and I just hats off to these wonderful women who have led the Peace Corps in previous years. You have just done such a stalwart job. I'm so pleased to be a part of just listening in on your stories and your conversations. Thank you for letting me join you tonight. And congratulations to Women of Peace Corps Legacy for all you've done in the last few years since you started this group. It's just been amazing. And I really am inspired by these stories and the leadership of the individuals that we've been hearing from tonight and all that you've done for the Peace Corps community. I would be happy to just mention, I think, what was announced yesterday as Congressman Mendy's Reauthorization Act. This is HR 1456 now. And this is a piece of legislation that National Peace Corps Association has been working on with Congressman Mendy's staff. And it is a reintroduction of a previous Peace Corps piece of legislation, HR 3456, which was introduced in 2019. Really what's amazing about this piece of legislation is it sets the vision for a Peace Corps of 10,000 volunteers over the longer term, with funding authorizations at $450 million for next year, going up over the years to $600 million. But also it really incorporates many of the reforms and improvements that we believe that the community has expressed both in the summits last year and the town halls and along the way in our work with the Peace Corps community to help expand and extend many of the benefits and entitlements to return Peace Corps volunteers. And it's just a very important piece of legislation, and we're very grateful for Congressman Mendy introducing this with co-sponsor Garrett Graves, the Republican co-chair of the Congressional Peace Corps Caucus. Lots of good provisions in there. What I can do is probably share a link to it in the chat, so everybody who would like to see it can be aware of it. There's several specifics within this that are important. Certainly the funding authorizations for the Peace Corps. Peace Corps, as many of you know, has been flat funded at $410 million now for the last 6 years, and that's what Carrie and Jody had to work with, basically. And that's a tremendous effort of recalling the volunteers and then redeploying volunteers here in the future. It's going to need continued funding for the Peace Corps, and the Peace Corps community is behind making sure that the future funding for the Peace Corps is there. The expedites the re-enrollment of volunteers. It extends some of the healthcare coverage for RPCVs as well. And it extends, in certain cases, the non-competitive eligibility for federal employment. It folds in aspects of the Respect for Peace Corps Volunteer Act, which allows RPCVs to have the Peace Corps logo on their grave marker. Also, just provides for increase in workers' compensation levels from GS7 to 11. Lots of other good stuff in this bill, so I'll just share a link to it. But more than anything, we think it sets the stage in this current administration for robust Peace Corps for the future that improves and expands the reach of our Peace Corps volunteers around the world. So thank you very much, Corey, for letting me chime in on that.
Oh, Glenn, thank you very much. And for everyone who works at NPCA, National Peace Corps Association, you guys carry a lot of heavy water, and it's greatly appreciated in this. And this, I know that what John Garamendi has put forward for legislation is something that you all have worked really hard on. And so, you know, we have you to thank for that as much as John Garamendi, if not more. So thank you all, NPCA. Okay, now I'm going to just ask one more question of our four wonderful former female directors. And it's this, because I want to go to Q&A. We want to leave adequate time for Q&A. So here's what I want to ask. No doubt you've learned lessons and encountered obstacles as a woman leader at Peace Corps and all these other fabulous positions that you've held. So what advice would you give to up and coming women leaders of today? And no order, just raise your hand and say, I want to talk.
Well, I think Jody has her hand up.
Jody, go.
You see my little hand there?
Oh, there is your hand. Yay.
First, I want to do a particular shout out to Glenn and to NPCA because during this last year, critically important was what NPCA did in total partnership with Peace Corps. Glenn, you and your team put the word out to RPCVs around the country to be there for returning volunteers. And you also helped give the very difficult messages that we had to give. So I want to say a special, special thank you for all that you did this last year. It meant everything to whatever we could do. So as I think about leadership, I have a few words written down, but I want to start with where Elaine was coming from and what she was talking about and learning and being part of Peace Corps. And because it is to me the core of what leadership is about. And Elaine, you said it so well. But for me, it is about, wait a minute, I have to scroll up here. Trust yourself. You have to trust yourself. You have to respect yourself. You have to be true to yourself in all that you do. Because leadership carries the great responsibility of respecting others. And self-respect is first in order for you to respect others. It is the core of honoring others. So whatever happens with leadership, whatever happens in your own training, learn to trust yourself, because then you can trust and respect others. Very quickly, some of the pieces that I think about when I think about leadership. One is passion, and you're seeing 4 Peace Corps directors that have a lot of passion. Trust in others, have clear goals and objectives. I'm a team builder. Be clear with decisions, but listen. I'll stop at that point.
All right, Jody, thank you. Awesome, wonderful. Who's got their hand up next?
I'll speak briefly.
All right, great. Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you, Jody. That was great advice. Really appreciate that. I guess my advice would be yourself and find other women to help support you. And then also really make it your job to help and support other women, especially young women. I had the great privilege of having a group of really experienced Peace Corps staff help me, and chief among them was Marianne Minutilo, who I know is on this call tonight, who I could not have done my job without Marianne. I'm so grateful to her. And there were many others, too numerous to mention, so I'm not going to because I'll get into trouble with that. But I think I like your advice about trusting yourself, and I think that's really important. You have to believe in yourselves. But finding other women to help support you and helping other women, making your job help other women, especially young women, I think that's also so important. One of the programs I loved the most when I was at Peace Corps was Let Girls Learn. Katie McSheffrey is another person who led that program and did such a magnificent job of implementing it and executing it with our country teams in the field. It's a program dedicated to educating and empowering young women, because Peace Corps volunteers can be such powerful role models and supporters of young women around the world. And I would love to tell a quick story because I cannot imagine a Peace Corps event where we don't have a story. So I want to share the story of a woman named Idai, who was a brilliant young woman I met in Kyrgyzstan. And Idai, I met her actually in the capital, Bishkek, but she had grown up in a remote farming community in a place called Palas Oblast, which is very far, 11 hours by bus from Bishkek. One day when she was, let's say, 15 years old, a Peace Corps volunteer teacher, Nicole McCormick, arrived in her community. And Nicole noticed that Ida was a good student and that she was strong in math and science, but also that she was a really caring and compassionate person. And Nicole asked Ida what she wanted to be when she grew up. And according to Ida, that question absolutely stunned her because it was unfathomable to her that she might do anything different from the work that her mother and her grandmother and generations of women had done before her. You know, she would work the land, she would be a mom. It never occurred to her that she had any other future apart from that. But Nicole sort of continued to ask her, and Nicole suggested that perhaps she could consider a career in science or medicine because she was so good at math and science because she had such a caring heart. And Ida told me that she said to Nicole, how could I be a doctor? I mean, I'm a girl from a small village. I mean, that's not even possible. I mean, nobody in my family has ever even graduated from high school before, much less go to the capital city and become a doctor. But Nicole told her that she was smart and capable and that Ida was capable of doing anything she put her mind to. And Nicole really made it her business to encourage Ida. She spent a lot of time with her. When the PCMO came out to do a visit to Nicole's community, she made sure that the PCMO talked to Ida and shared advice on applying to med school. And gradually over time, Ida began to dream about being a doctor. She began to believe that she could do it. And so when she graduated from high school, she applied to medical school and she was offered a full scholarship. And today, Ida is her nation's leading cardiologist, and she is also a part-time PCMO. But Ida tells me that that would never have happened without Nicole's encouragement and support. We don't have to go to Kyrgyzstan to support a young person, but every single one of us has the ability and the responsibility to mentor others, to see the potential in others. So I guess that would be my advice to other women and other young women especially.
Oh, great. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you. The importance of mentoring and passing it forward. Wonderful. Thank you. All right, Carol.
I'm going to jump in for a second here. So I often say the most important thing I ever did in my life was be a Peace Corps volunteer. And because it shaped everything else in my life. Why? Because I learned about myself. I'm going to repeat some of the things that both Jody and Carrie have said in terms of guidance. I learned about myself. I learned to listen. Why did I learn to listen? Partly I learned to listen because we had to, it was a different language. I had to speak Spanish and I didn't always understand it. So I had to really listen hard to know what was going on. I learned that failure in some things is inevitable. But if you trust yourself, you get back up, you wipe off your bloody nose and you figure out some other way to get it done. You had to do that. You couldn't turn to somebody else and say, will you do this for me? Or will you do this for me? We were there. I learned it all in the Peace Corps. I'm sure for those RPCBs who are listening, I mean, my chicken project was successful. My rabbit project was a mess. I mean, but you moved on. You didn't leave it. You moved on. You figured out another way to get it done. So I say again, for me, Peace Corps, being a volunteer, it just really shaped everything. One last, I want to, for women, as they do become more successful, and again, to repeat what's already been said, and you climb that ladder of success, the most important thing is not to keep looking up, but it's to make sure you look back and help the person on the rung behind you and perhaps on the person on the rung behind her. That's what will make you go up faster.
Oh, Carol, awesome. You guys, very inspirational, all of you. Thank you so much. Elaine, can I ask you to contribute your thoughts on this? We'd love to hear from you.
You know, when I was younger, because I'm an immigrant to this country, it was such a searing experience. I actually worried all the time as to whether I would survive. It seems so strange to hear that now, but my family and I wondered whether we would ever find our place in America. But I was guided by wonderful parents, and they always taught us, it's not important who you are. I mean, to be somebody. It's more important to do something, to help people, to contribute to society. And I think that's really important, especially in the world that we live in these days. There's so much self-promotion, and I'm just not comfortable with that. And to this day, if you read some of my letters, I never use the word I. It's always we, or it's in the third voice passive. This was done by us, or something like that. And I think our country is so much more open now to different types of diverse leadership. I am old nowadays too, so I think, so I'm optimistic, that we are becoming a more diverse country where we are more open to learning about people of diverse, different backgrounds. And I think Peace Corps led the way with the third, objective, and also in the first objective also. All Peace Corps volunteers who served overseas are wonderful ambassadors when they come back, explaining the international environment to the rest of the country. So on leadership, I think you have to find your own way. Everybody has their own style. You have to be comfortable. And I echo what everybody else says. You have to be yourself. You have to find what is comfortable with you. And I'm very participatory. I don't talk very much. I believe it or not. I actually try to listen a lot. And I think I'm a pretty good listener. And I think in the world that I live, that I work in, finding consensus, finding that common thread, of a path forward is very important. And I think Peace Corps has taught me to listen better, to listen more carefully. Thank you.
All right, Elaine, thank you very much. Thank all four of you very much. Words of wisdom from our former female Peace Corps directors. Very meaningful, very inspirational, you guys. Thank you. We're going to turn now, with the time we have left, to have a couple of questions. We've had such a rich discussion. We probably won't have enough time to get to more than a couple, but Katie, I'm going to turn this over to you right now. And Annie, our wonderful intern, Annie, and Katie McSheffrey, our vice president, and we will begin with some questions.
Thank you, Corey. And thank you to all the former directors for being here. It's really nice to see you all. And before I ask our first question, I would like to tell everyone we don't have a chat tonight. So the bill that Glenn mentioned, we will include the link in the email of the recording that we send out to everybody so that you get it. Okay. And so the first question will be asked by Martha King. Martha, can you unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
First, I want to thank you so much for these inspiring presentations. I love all of you. And I was an RPCV from South Korea, 73 to 75. And then just recently returned as a Peace Corps response volunteer in Lusaka, where I was thrilled to see Carrie last year. So that was cool. So my question really relates to Elaine Chao's really important question about recruiting more volunteers of color and lower income recruits. It's so much easier for privileged youth and people like me who were retired in a privileged situation to join. It's much harder for those with financial obligations, as Elaine shared with her own family. So how can we address this challenge?
Are you asking me or other people?
All of you.
Who was going to pipe up? I'll let the other person speak first.
I'll speak up just very quickly. I'm so glad you asked the question. And Elaine, I am so glad you made the comments that you made, because this is a responsibility that is so hard to work with, because all of our processes don't necessarily really push us in the direction of appreciating and reaching into the diversity of this country. And so my comment is, and we worked, and I think all 4 of us as directors worked on, and I know that when I left in January, well, when volunteers left last March, we were at about 35% of volunteers of color, which is a significant growth, but it must be better. And for me, it's always making sure we're hiring people that represent the diversity that we're looking for, that we go into the communities and we tell the story from the perspective of those who might want to serve.
I'll say something. You know, I'm so sorry because my internet must be a little bit unstable because I totally missed the question. But now that I've heard Jody respond, I think this is a critically important question and probably the question of our time. And I think to some extent, my answer would be similar to sort of to my response to the sexual assault problem. We have to listen to volunteers and staff, to their experience and their lived experience, the challenges that they face, and especially their ideas for how we can make it better, so that it can be, so that we can be much more effective at meeting their needs and to attract a more diverse body of volunteers. It's something that we thought about a lot while I was in the Peace Corps, and it was the other thing that I was thinking about talking about instead of sexual assault. I really do think that it is where Peace Corps needs to focus in the future. And I think that the advice of volunteers and staff who have this lived experience is going to be really important. I do think that addressing our own painful history, confronting the dark side of our nation and how we express the love we have for our country while also acknowledging and being honest about a painful and tragic and violent past and present is going to be critical. And there's a lot of conversation in this space about how do we address some of the racist, colonial, and patriarchal systems that not only have governed our own country, but have governed the world since time immemorial. And I think we need to do so much more to help prepare all volunteers to address both our colonial past, but also learn from it as we seek to build bridges with other cultures and nations. And also just to make service, so much more supportive of all volunteers.
Just a quick word from me. I agree with everything that's been said. I think there has to be very specific targeted actions. And just one of many, in my view, is to really reach out and encourage those volunteers, those people of color who have served as Peace Corps volunteers, because there's a veracity, there's a truth there, there's an experience there, there's also the good and the bad there. But I think that is a way to really be able to engage in conversation that is real conversation and should be utilized even more.
Thanks for the question, Martha.
All right, so the next question will be asked by Malia Boggs. Malia, can you unmute your mic and ask your question?
Yes, thanks, Katie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. And I really appreciate all of you for your candor and just sharing your stories. I've really been inspired listening to you all today. So I'm an RPCV from Zambia in the 90s, and also Carol, I also worked with UNICEF in 2000 when you were the UNICEF executive director. So it's really phenomenal to just hear from all of you. I'm just wondering if you can talk about how you balanced your illustrious, careers with motherhood, and whether you felt the need to lean in to continue to grow and advance and really assume positions of continued sort of leadership and responsibility. Thank you.
I'll give one quick answer. Don't ask my kids. It's like, mother who? I'd come home and I would say, who am I? I'll give you 3 guesses and the first 2 don't count. It's a very complex question and a complex answer. And you do your best. You try to be true to whatever you are and try to find the professional passion. But first and foremost is you have to be true to your family.
Yeah, I guess I would definitely second that. I think family always comes first. I was fortunate in that I became deputy director and then director after my kids were already in college, so I didn't have to take care of them on a daily basis. It would have been really hard because I traveled a lot and I worked long hours. I also had a husband who was very, very supportive of my work, has always been very supportive of my career, and we were really true partners throughout our marriage and raising the children and taking care of family responsibilities. So I guess my other advice would be choose your partner well.
I probably shouldn't answer because I haven't been a mother, but I want to speak from the other side. I think it is critically important that organizations take this issue very seriously, because if they do not, then you are penalizing women in many cases. Again, men can be fathers, but we know that the women are doing more, in most cases, more of the parenting in so many instances. And I think it is critical that there be family sensitive policies, particularly in organizations, because otherwise you really are creating a penalty for the mothers.
Any other responses before I ask probably our final question? Okay, this was actually, I'm gonna read a question from an anonymous person, but this particular question came up from multiple people because obviously country director or working for Peace Corps is the dream role for many returned Peace Corps volunteers. So someone wrote, these are huge shoes to fill, yet the panel has paved the way for the future. Thank you. I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer, I'm female, and I'm a person of color. Given Peace Corps' relevance right now, what does the panel recommend to those of us who want to pursue a future role as a country director or other administrative role?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. You know, I think a couple of things from my experience, and I'm 4 years out of the job, but I think the qualities that make for a good country director are the same qualities that make for a good manager and leader anywhere. I mean, I think you need to have the experience, and it's essentially a management job, and especially a management of people, and especially young people, but not only young people, of course, but you know, my advice would be make sure you have some management experience, because that will make you more, and if you led an intercultural team, then that's going to give you a heads up. The other thing I think, you know, Peace Corps looks for the passion for the mission. I mean, you have to love what you're doing because it's long hours, you know, it's 24/7 and it's 365 days a week, especially as a country director. And so having a passion for the work is critical. And then the last thing is, I would say, is really a strong understanding of the importance of safety and security. We used to do a lot of scenario running with in our interviews with CDs, and they almost always had to do with medical care and safety and security. So really understanding that and owning that. And I think now I think it's critically important now. I think Peace Corps really needs to lean into the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So I think that's such a critical role. And we need more country directors and staff who are people of color, who have served in the Peace Corps and can bring your lived experience, your perspectives, your ideas, and especially your support to volunteers. I'd love to see us really diversify the staff of Peace Corps, particularly in the country. So I really hope you're successful in your goal.
I want to back up what Carrie just said and everything, particularly the management experience and leading and team building. Also, as you have a mentor along the journey, someone who might have been a Peace Corps director at some point or other kinds of leadership positions, so you've got someone that you're bouncing something off of. I also want to pick up on what your last point, Carrie, that to be a country director of color, which is now a much more sort of natural within Peace Corps than it was a while ago, but it's so critical to have country directors of color to come to the comment and the question that was asked that Elaine was working with, to have volunteers that represent all of the diversity is strengthened when the country directors themselves represent that diversity that we're trying to show around the world. And so it's exciting. I'm so glad you asked the question. Stay on it. You'll succeed.
Hey, this is Elaine. I actually don't know how country directors are selected. So maybe, it would help. I don't know how, or maybe the RPCV, the association, they can kind of give little seminars as to how are country directors selected. I mean, I was a director, I didn't select them, so I have no idea. There are actually two types, as you all know, of employees. One is, of course, the political appointees that the director has some control over, but then below that, beyond that, their career positions. And I think they go through a panel, and then there are like different panels, different cuts. I think it might be helpful if just we demystify that kind of process so that more people would know what the process entails. Just a little suggestion.
No, Elaine, I totally agree with what you just said. Probably the third most common question that I've been asked the last 3 or 4 years is, how do you become a Peace Corps country director? And it's demystifying that process because it's a very normal type of a process, but it somehow is like in the Wizard of Oz, it's that person behind the curtain and we don't quite know what it's about. So yes, let's make it more transparent.
Let me just interject one thing here. One of the things that NPCA does with the global reentry, it's called Podcast with Jody. That's Jody Hammer. And she will take a topic of interest to the RPCV community and spend an hour interviewing an appropriate person to give information based on the questions that have come to her over specific things. So this would be a great podcast with Jody, I believe. So we could get that out there through NPCA. We're going to have it on this day, and then several country directors and those who select them could be on there to answer questions. So that is something. Thank you, Elaine. That is something I think we could take on.
Great.
Okay, everybody. I think it is now. Actually, we are after 8 o'clock. So it is difficult for me to bring closure to this because I'd like to go for another couple hours. And I guess what I'm thinking right now or feeling right now is that I hope at some point in the future we can bring this illustrious group back together and have further discussions, especially as we watch how Peace Corps goes into the future under this very challenging time. Maybe we can all get together and talk about our ideas for what Peace Corps can be and things of that nature, and pick your brains more on more topics of interest to the group that is assembled here tonight. Excuse me. So what I want to say is a big thank you, a huge thank you to Elaine, Carol, Carrie, Jody, so much. Thank you for giving us the time, sharing your insights, sharing your advice, paying it forward to other women leaders who are very interested in hearing what you had to say. So, and audience, thank you for coming. We had a great turnout, and it's very encouraging to see that Women of Peace Corps Legacy will be able to continue in the future with some of these very interesting virtual meetings. So look us up on our social media, Women of Peace Corps Legacy. We're a great group. Please join us.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Corey, and thank you, Women of
Yes.
Peace Corps Legacy, and thank you,
you.
Glenn. It was great to see Glenn.
Yes, thank you so much.
And Katie. Bye-bye.
Take good care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
all.